The manila envelope sat unopened on Sarah Mitchell's tiny kitchen counter, its presence both intriguing and intimidating. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the law firm's embossed letterhead. After the year she'd had, any official correspondence made her nervous. The afternoon sun filtered through her apartment's single window, illuminating the dancing dust particles and the stack of unpaid bills beside her laptop. Taking a deep breath, she opened the envelope. Dear Ms. Mitchell, we are writing to inform you that your grandfather, Theodore Mitchell, has left you his property at 1847 Victorian Grove. Sarah had to read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Her grandfather, whom she hadn't seen since she was 12, had left her his house. The news transported her back to 6 months ago, when her world had crumbled. She'd found the texts on James's phone by accident. Can't wait to see you again, baby. Sarah's working late again, her loss, our gain. The message from Victoria, his 25-year-old marketing assistant, was just one of hundreds stretching back 8 months. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering how James had barely looked guilty when confronted. Come on, Sarah. You're always busy with your little freelance projects. What did you expect? Victoria understands my needs. The words still stung, even now. 12 years of marriage, dissolved by a woman who wore red-soled shoes and carried bags worth more than Sarah's monthly income. Her gaze drifted to her makeshift home office, a corner of her studio apartment where her drafting tablet competed for space with coffee mugs and reference books. The divorce had forced her to leave their comfortable suburban home and restart her graphic design career from scratch. Each client was hard-won, each project crucial for making rent. At 36, this wasn't where she'd imagined herself. Her phone buzzed a text from her best friend Lisa. Saw James and the princess at Riverside Cafe. Thought you should know they're back in town. Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd been avoiding their old haunts specifically to prevent such encounters. But fate had other plans. As she left her apartment building that evening, heading to the lawyer's office to discuss the inheritance, there they were, James and Victoria, stepping out of his newly leased Mercedes. Sarah? Is that you? James's voice carried that familiar condescending tone. You're looking well, you're looking. Victoria giggled, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she clutched James's arm. I heard about your grandfather's old place. Victoria chimed in, her red lips curving into a smirk. That decrepit house on Victorian Grove? My real estate friend says it's practically condemned. But hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? James chuckled, adjusting his expensive watch. You should sell it, Sarah, before it falls apart completely. I know a developer who might take it off your hands for land value, of course. Sarah clutched the inheritance letter in her purse, her knuckles white. She lifted her chin, met their mocking gazes, and walked past without a word. They didn't know what this inheritance meant to her. A chance, an opportunity, a fresh start. And they certainly didn't know what she was capable of. Sarah stood before 1847 Victorian Grove the next morning, keys jingling nervously in her hand. The house loomed before her, its weathered facade telling stories of decades past. Yes, the paint was peeling, and ivy crept unchecked across the western wall, but beneath the neglect she could see hints of former grandeur. Intricate wooden trim, reminiscent of delicate lace, crowned the windows. A wraparound porch, though sagging in places, spoke of lazy summer evenings and quiet contemplation. It's been waiting for you, a soft voice said, making Sarah jump. An elderly Asian woman stood at the neighboring fence, her silver hair neat in a bun, dark eyes sharp and intelligent. I'm Mrs. Chen. I've lived next door for 40 years. Your grandfather and I had tea every Sunday until his passing. Sarah approached the fence, drawn by the mention of her grandfather. Did you know him well? Mrs. Chen smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Theodore was a historian at heart. He knew every secret this house held. Come, I'll show you something before you go inside. The older woman led Sarah around to the side of the house, pointing to what appeared to be an ordinary foundation stone. Look closely at the marking. Sarah knelt down, brushing away decades of dirt to reveal an engraving. WM, 1847. William Morrison, Mrs. Chen said reverently. One of the most innovative architects of the Victorian era. He only designed 12 houses in his lifetime. This is one of 3 that remain standing. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. William Morrison, She'd studied his work in her architectural history classes before switching to graphic design. His buildings were renowned for their revolutionary features and hidden spaces. Inside, the house was a time capsule. Dust motes danced in sunbeams that streamed through stained glass windows, creating kaleidoscope patterns on the hardwood floors. The foyer opened to a grand staircase that curved elegantly upward, its mahogany banister dulled by time but intact. To her right, pocket doors with etched glass panels led to what must have been a formal parlor. The electricity was updated 10 years ago, Mrs. Chen mentioned, following Sarah inside. Theodore insisted on maintaining the home's systems, even if he couldn't afford cosmetic repairs. In the kitchen, Sarah found her first treasure. Behind what appeared to be a simple spice cabinet, she discovered a hidden dumbwaiter system, complete with its original pulleys. Her hands trembled as she examined the craftsmanship. These were the innovations. Morrison was famous for practical solutions disguised as ordinary fixtures. Upstairs, the master bedroom took her breath away. A bay window formed a perfect reading nook, overlooking gardens now wild with neglect. The ceiling featured hand-painted medallions, faded but intact, depicting the 4 seasons. As she ran her hand along the wood-paneled walls, she felt a slight give. Pressing harder, a panel popped open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "My dearest Sarah," the first page read in her grandfather's careful script. If you're reading this, you've already discovered one of Morrison's secrets. There are so many more. This house was built for a purpose beyond mere shelter. It was designed to protect something precious. Sarah sank onto a dusty window seat, her grandfather's journal cradled in her lap. As she read, her eyes widened. The house wasn't just architecturally significant, it had been commissioned by a prominent abolitionist family. The hidden spaces, the unusual layout, the discreet entrances and exits all had served a greater purpose. This had been a stop on the Underground Railroad. Throughout the afternoon, Sarah explored, Mrs. Chen occasionally offering commentary. They found more hidden panels, secret passages between rooms, and even a concealed staircase leading to what must have been a safe room in the attic. Each discovery made Sarah's heart race faster. In the library, beneath years of grime, she found the original architectural drawings, signed by Morrison himself. The details were extraordinary: innovative ventilation systems, carefully planned sight lines for lookouts, and water collection systems that were decades ahead of their time. "Your grandfather spent years documenting everything," Mrs. Chen said softly. "He knew the Historical Society would be interested, but he wanted the right person to bring it to light. He chose you, Sarah." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, Sarah stood in the foyer once more. She saw it now not a condemned building, but a testament to courage, innovation, and human dignity. The peeling paint and creaking floors weren't signs of decay but badges of honor, marks of a house that had sheltered those in need of protection, those seeking freedom. Her phone buzzed. Another text from James. "Thought about my offer? That old wreck isn't worth your time." Sarah smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket without responding. Let them think what they wanted. She had work to do, and for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. The Historical Society of Wellington's conference room buzzed with excitement. Sarah sat at the large oak table, surrounded by wide-eyed board members, as she carefully laid out her grandfather's documentation. The architectural drawings, the journal entries, the photographs, each piece adding to a story that had remained hidden for over a century. "This is remarkable, Ms. Mitchell." Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the Society's director, leaned forward, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. "A confirmed William Morrison house with documented Underground Railroad connections. The historical significance is immeasurable." Before Sarah could respond, the conference room door burst open. James strode in, Victoria trailing behind him in stilettos that clicked against the hardwood floor. "Sorry we're late," he announced, flashing his practiced courtroom smile. "I'm James Mitchell, representing Horizon Development Group. We have a standing interest in the Victorian Grove property." Sarah's stomach clenched. "What are you doing here?" "Looking out for your best interests, of course." James pulled out a chair, settling in as if he owned the room. "The development potential of that land is significant. Our offer still stands $300,000 as is." "The property isn't for sale," Sarah stated firmly, gathering her documents. Victoria's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Sarah, honey, be realistic. You can barely afford your apartment. How do you plan to restore a historical property?" Dr. Hayes cleared her throat. "Actually, properties with confirmed historical significance are eligible for various preservation grants. Given the unique architectural features and documented historical importance, this house would qualify for substantial funding." "If you'll excuse me," a deep voice interjected from the doorway. "I believe I can help with that." A tall man in his early 40s stepped into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, but carried himself with quiet authority. "Marcus Rivera," he introduced himself, nodding to Sarah. "Historical preservation architect. Dr. Hayes called me in to consult." He spread out his own set of documents on the table. "I've done some preliminary research on the property. The restoration potential is extraordinary." Over the next hour, Marcus walked them through his assessment. He pointed out the architectural innovations that made the house unique, the historical features that could be preserved, and the modifications that would make it functional for modern use while maintaining its integrity. James attempted to interject several times, but Marcus's expertise was undeniable. When he pulled up before and after photos of his previous restoration projects, even Victoria's smirk faltered. The grants alone could cover 60% of the restoration costs, Marcus explained, his dark eyes meeting Sarah's. "Add in tax credits for historical preservation, and we're looking at a very manageable investment. Plus, given the house's significance, I'd be willing to offer my services at a reduced rate." That evening, Sarah found herself back at the house, this time with Marcus beside her. They walked through each room as he pointed out details she'd missed: the unique angle of the roof designed to collect rainwater, the specially crafted window frames that allowed for secret signals, the intricate ventilation system that kept hidden spaces habitable. "Your grandfather documented everything meticulously," Marcus said, examining the journal. "But there's something else here, something we're missing." They spent hours in the library, poring over old papers. Sarah's graphic design skills proved invaluable as she noticed patterns in the architectural drawings, subtle marks that seemed out of place. "These aren't just building plans," she realized, overlaying the drawings. "They're a map. Look, when you align these marks, they form a path through the house. There must be more hidden spaces we haven't found." Their excitement was interrupted by a loud knock. James stood at the front door, his lawyer beside him. "Sarah, this is ridiculous," he called through the screen. "I have developers ready to break ground on luxury condos. Think about the money you're throwing away." "The house isn't for sale," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Then I'll be forced to contest the inheritance," he threatened. "As your former spouse, I have grounds to claim partial interest in any property you acquired during our marriage." Marcus stepped forward. "The inheritance was executed after your divorce was finalized. You have no legal claim." His tone was professional but firm, and given the property's pending historical designation, any development plans would face significant regulatory hurdles. James's face reddened. "You don't want to make an enemy of me, Sarah. I know people. I can make this very difficult for you." "You already did that," Sarah replied, surprised by her own calmness, "when you chose to throw away our marriage. But this," she gestured to the house around her, "this is my choice. My future. And you have no part in it." After they left, Sarah sank onto the stairs, shaking. Marcus sat beside her, his presence reassuring. "You know," he said quietly, "I've restored dozens of historical homes, but I've never seen one with quite this much heart, or an owner with quite this much determination." Sarah smiled, running her hand along the worn banister. "I used to think inheritances were about money or property, but my grandfather left me something more valuable. He left me a purpose." They worked late into the night, mapping out restoration plans, identifying priorities, calculating costs. When Sarah finally returned to her apartment, she found an email from Dr. Hayes. The Historical Society was fast-tracking the house's historical designation. They wanted to feature it in their upcoming preservation showcase. She fell asleep at her desk, surrounded by printouts and plans, her grandfather's journal open beside her. For the first time since her divorce, her dreams weren't filled with what she'd lost, but with what she was about to create. The first months of restoration were like a delicate dance between preservation and modern necessity. Sarah quickly learned that historical restoration wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about breathing new life into forgotten stories. Marcus introduced her to a network of local craftsmen who specialized in historical preservation. There was Miguel, a master carpenter whose family had worked on historical homes for generations, and Elena, a stained glass restoration expert who could repair century-old glass with surgical precision. "We're not just fixing a house," Miguel told her one morning, carefully removing a damaged section of original crown molding. "We're healing a piece of history." His hands moved with reverence, treating each piece of wood like a precious artifact. The discoveries came almost daily. Behind a water-damaged wall in the library, they found a cache of letters from the original owners, a family who had risked everything to shelter escaped slaves. Sarah spent nights transcribing these fragile documents, her graphic design skills proving invaluable in digital preservation. Her relationship with Marcus evolved naturally. What started as a professional collaboration became something deeper. He saw her differently from James, not as an accessory or an afterthought, but as a partner. They would spend hours discussing the house's history, Marcus sharing stories of other restoration projects, Sarah offering fresh perspectives. "You have an eye for this," he'd tell her, watching her carefully map out restoration plans. "Most people see an old house. You see its soul." The local community became increasingly intrigued. Wellington wasn't used to seeing such meticulous restoration. News spread quickly the old Mitchell house was being brought back to life, not destroyed for another soulless development. Local historians began dropping by. Photography students asked to document the restoration. The high school's history club even made a field trip to learn about architectural preservation. Sarah found herself giving impromptu lectures, her confidence growing with each presentation. Her graphic design work took an unexpected turn. Clients began requesting historical documentation services. Her experience with the house restoration translated into a unique skill set, digitizing historical documents, creating preservation-quality reproductions, designing historical exhibit materials. One Saturday morning, Victoria showed up unannounced. She stood in the partially restored library, her designer shoes covered in a fine layer of construction dust. "James is furious," she said, looking around. "He can't believe you're actually doing this." Sarah didn't rise to the bait. "Would you like to see the original Morrison architectural drawings we discovered?" Her tone was professional, her smile genuine. Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her discomfort. This wasn't the Sarah she remembered, uncertain, always seeking approval. This Sarah was confident, passionate, in complete control. The restoration wasn't just about the house. It was about Sarah reclaiming her narrative. Each repaired floorboard, each restored window, each uncovered historical detail was a statement. She was rebuilding herself, just as she was rebuilding the house. Marcus helped her navigate the complex world of historical preservation grants. They discovered the house qualified for multiple funding sources, not just for its architectural significance, but for its role in the Underground Railroad. Sarah's meticulous documentation became crucial in securing these grants. By the 8th month, the transformation was remarkable. The house's original character emerged, enhanced by careful, thoughtful modernization. Original hardwood floors were refinished, revealing rich patterns hidden for decades. Electrical and plumbing systems were updated without compromising historical integrity. The stained glass windows that Mrs. Chen had first pointed out were fully restored. Elena had spent weeks carefully reconstructing missing pieces, matching original colors and techniques. When sunlight streamed through them, the entire house seemed to come alive with color and history. James made one final attempt to interfere. He arrived with legal papers claiming potential structural issues that would require demolition, but the Historical Society's documentation, combined with Marcus's expert assessment, quickly shut down his claims. "This house is more than just a building," Sarah told him, standing on the freshly restored front porch. "It's a testament to resilience, to hope, to people who fought for something bigger than themselves." As winter approached, the house stood transformed, not erased of its history, but honored, restored, alive. Sarah's phone rang. It was the Wellington Historical Society. They wanted to feature her restoration project in their annual gala. Her journey from a recently divorced graphic designer to a respected historical preservation expert was complete. The house had been her inheritance. But her true inheritance, she realized, was something far more valuable: her own strength, her vision, her ability to see beauty where others saw only decay. The declaration came on a crisp autumn morning. Dr. Eleanor Hayes from the Historical Society stood beside Sarah, presenting the official plaque that would forever mark 1847 Victorian Grove as a significant historical landmark. Cameras flashed, local reporters scribbled notes, and Marcus stood nearby, his proud smile reserved but genuine. Not just a house, Dr. Hayes proclaimed, but a living testament to Wellington's critical role in the Underground Railroad. The Morrison House, as it will now be officially known, represents more than architectural brilliance, it represents human courage. Within weeks, national preservation magazines picked up the story. Sarah found herself interviewed by journalists fascinated by her journey from graphic designer to historical preservation expert. Her digital reconstructions of the house's hidden histories became a sensation, attracting scholars and history buffs from across the country. The property's value skyrocketed. Initial estimates placed its worth at nearly $2 million, a far cry from James's lowball offers. But Sarah wasn't interested in selling. This was about preservation, about honoring history. James and Victoria's final attempt to claim ownership came through a desperate legal maneuver. They argued that portions of the restoration funding came during their marriage, therefore entitling them to partial ownership. Marcus, with his extensive legal knowledge of historical property rights, methodically dismantled their claims. The inheritance was finalized post-divorce, Marcus testified during the brief hearing. Furthermore, Ms. Mitchell has personally funded and managed over 40% of the restoration through her professional work and secured grants. Your claims are without merit. The judge dismissed their lawsuit with a stern warning about frivolous legal actions. Sarah's graphic design business transformed. Museums, historical societies, and preservation organizations began seeking her expertise. She developed a niche practice specializing in digital historical documentation and preservation design. Local universities invited her to guest lecture. The Underground Railroad research she'd uncovered became the basis for a documentary. Marcus continued to support her, their professional relationship slowly blossoming into something more personal. Mrs. Chen watched it all unfold from her adjacent property, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Theodore would be proud, she told Sarah during one of their frequent tea times. He always knew you were special. The house became more than a building. It was a symbol of transformation, of Sarah's personal journey, of historical preservation, of resilience. Where James and Victoria had seen a worthless inheritance, Sarah had built a legacy. On the one-year anniversary of her grandfather's inheritance, Sarah stood on the restored front porch. The house gleamed, its restored beauty a testament to patience, hard work, and vision. She wasn't the same woman who had first received that manila envelope. She was stronger, more confident. Unbreakable. The grand opening of the Morrison House was more than an event, it was a celebration of redemption. Wellington's most prominent citizens, historians, and preservation experts filled the restored mansion. Soft classical music played, champagne flowed, and the house seemed to breathe with renewed life. Marcus approached Sarah, adjusting her boutonniere, a delicate purple orchid that matched the restored stained glass windows. "You did it," he said softly. Their relationship had grown beyond professional collaboration, blossoming into something deeper, more intimate. James and Victoria arrived late, hoping to make an entrance. Instead, they found themselves on the periphery, watching as Sarah commanded the room. She was no longer the uncertain woman they'd dismissed. She was a respected historical preservation specialist, her work featured in national magazines. Dr. Eleanor Hayes took the microphone. "The Morrison House represents more than architectural restoration," she proclaimed. "It's a testament to one woman's vision, courage, and determination." As the evening progressed, Sarah found a moment of quiet in her grandfather's old study. The room, once dusty and forgotten, now gleamed with carefully restored woodwork and original artifacts. She traced her fingers along a display of Underground Railroad documents, stories of courage, of hope, of transformation. Marcus joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts." Sarah smiled. "I was thinking about how much has changed. A year ago I was living in a tiny apartment, reeling from my divorce. Now," she gestured around the room, at the life she'd rebuilt. The event concluded with a documentary screening about the house's restoration. Footage showed Sarah's journey from that first day she'd received the inheritance to the meticulous restoration process. When James and Victoria were shown in their failed legal attempts, the audience murmured. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Sarah and Marcus stood on the grand front porch. The house was quiet, but alive with history. I didn't just restore a house, Sarah reflected. I restored myself. Marcus kissed her, the moonlight casting shadows through the restored stained glass windows. The Morrison house stood as a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the incredible transformation possible when one refuses to be defined by their past. Her grandfather's inheritance had been more than a building. It was a second chance, and she had seized it with both hands.